Hello, all, and welcome back to another episode of Movies and Us, a weekly gathering place filled with conversations about movies, stories, and connection. My name is Jennifer Hahn.
And I'm Sarah Callan.
And today we're going to be reviewing the latest Sofia Coppola film titled Priscilla. Sarah, do you want to kick us off with an IMDb summary for Priscilla?
Sure. Jen, this one is a doozy. This is not a well-written sentence. It's very bothersome to me. So please enjoy this with me.
Okay.
When teenage Priscilla Beaulieu meets Elvis Presley, the man who is already a meteoric rock and roll superstar becomes someone entirely unexpected in private moments, a thrilling crush, an ally in loneliness, and a vulnerable best friend.
Oh my gosh. I feel like that was so much overstimulation of words.
It is so much. Like, what? Doesn't make sense.
It seems to put a stake in the ground on like the three main pillars of their relationship too, where I'm like, I have some questions.
I also have some questions. Maybe they watched a different movie than I
I
did.
think so.
Because this is very different.
A lot is happening in that one sentence summary, as is in this movie.
Yes.
So that's fitting, perhaps
Yeah.
on brand. You know, they were going for like a artistic tonal parallelism between their summary and the movie.
Okay. Okay. I see. Thank you for unlocking that for me, because I was quite confused.
Okay, well, let's start off with our summaries of choice for Priscilla. Sarah, what is yours?
Mine is never trust a man with a tiger statue in his bedroom.
Yo, this is some great advice for the people out there, man.
I'm
Yeah.
just saying, they showed Elvis's bedroom in Graceland, and my first thought was run. Like, no. With that bedroom decor, you want nothing to do with this, honey. No.
Oh my gosh, yeah. It's a cave in there. It really is a
Yeah.
cave in there.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. This is great advice. More PSA dating red flags for all the people out there.
Absolutely. Hey, I'm just trying to look out. We got to be careful out there. So
Yes.
don't trust a dude if he has a tiger statue in his bedroom. It's a red
It is
flag.
not small either. That thing is like nearly life size, maybe a little bit smaller, maybe like a baby tiger sized.
Yes.
Yikes.
Yeah. That's a red flag.
My one sentence summary is a master's thesis for the imperatives of schoolwork and good grades.
Hello. Yes. This is why
She
we go to
only,
school.
yes, committed herself a little more in school. Perhaps she'd be on a better path than the one that she lands on.
Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty rough.
Okay, let's start off with our initial thoughts of Priscilla. We won't spoil this movie in this first section. I'm intrigued to hear your thoughts about this movie, Sarah. Did this work for you?
Yeah, it did work for me.
Amazing.
Which surprised me, honestly.
Yes.
I was
Me
prepared
too.
to feel kind of like meh, all right about this, but no, like I really enjoyed this movie. It really had me thinking about a lot of like bigger topics. Uh, so I think that this was a good vehicle for me to be thinking about some of the larger themes. And I really enjoyed that. And honestly, like I was sucked in, I was interested, I was looking at all of the red flags that were just constantly popping up on the screen. And it was really fascinating to watch, you know, the people kind of complicit in Priscilla's story and how she ended up
That's
in
so
this
good.
relationship, and kind of some of the things that were working against her. So I think there's a lot going on in this film that I really enjoyed thinking about while watching and afterwards.
Well, I'm excited to dive into some of those themes that it sounds like this movie really ignited for you. That'll be fun. That'll be really great. Um, I think that this movie's solid. This movie's solid. it sounds like I probably didn't love it as much as you did, but I think that there's one big thing that this movie does that I really appreciate, which is its ability to showcase these big intense moments, but do it in an incredibly elegant way and avoid the temptation of leaning into melodrama. I think that we've in the past couple of years seen a long slew of biopics and kind of retellings of historical events of these kind of larger than life personalities, and they are very melodramatic and they lean very heavily into the emotional gut punches in ways that feel a little bit cheap. And I think that this movie is so tasteful in its ability to use restraint from doing that. And it actually makes it a lot more effective. So I'm excited to talk about those things and choices that Sofia Coppola's made. And then I I kind of viewed this movie through the lens, particularly of gender roles. That was kind of a common theme running around in my mind throughout. So while this is about Priscilla and it is about Elvis and their story, I think that there's so much that's universal, which I think will be fun to dive into. And I think this is probably a good time for us to also say that, like, I personally am not very well versed or familiar with Priscilla Presley and her persona and who she was as a human being. So every all of my comments will be filtered through that lens as far as what this film meant to me and what stuck out to me. Sarah, what about you?
No, I'm the same. I know little about Priscilla Presley. I listened to Elvis's music a lot growing up because my grandma loved
Mm-hmm.
his music. But I I don't know a lot about him either, like as a person. I just know
Yeah,
his discography. Um, and so it was really interesting to see these two people that I know of
yeah.
portrayed in this light. And I do agree with what you said that this movie is very restrained. Like
Mm-hmm.
honestly, I expected this to paint a much harsher view of Elvis than it does.
Yeah.
Obviously, like it's doing him no favors, but I expected this to be to to show some like be a scathing indictment of
Yeah.
him, and it's very restrained in its
Yeah.
portrayal of him. So I did appreciate that, even though it's pointing out some very very difficult things in their relationship and ways that he mistreated her. uh it doesn't go as far as it maybe could have, and I think that that
Mm-hmm.
was a wise choice from Sofia Coppola.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally agreed. Totally agreed. So that's our PSA. Like, take everything we say with a grain of salt as far as like our commentary about these people. We're really looking at this in terms of characters in this film. Um, Probably a good time to include a spoiler. If you haven't seen Priscilla, please check it out in theaters before continuing to listen. And let's dive fully in. Sarah, I'm intrigued to hear about some of those themes that really were ignited for you from this movie that you found yourself ruminating on.
Yeah, I think it all started with how the film opens. So like it
Yeah,
opens with glimpses of Priscilla getting ready, and then you see all of the film credits kind of intercut between her getting ready. And so when I noticed that this is based on Priscilla Presley's book and she's also a producer of this film, that immediately got me thinking about the stories that we tell and how we're living in a moment, even though the book that this is based off of came out decades ago. We are living in a moment where more women are able to tell their stories and even more women's stories are being brought to the big screen. And so the whole time I was watching, I was just thinking about that and and Priscilla's story and how cool it is that she is able to entrust her story to this female director who is also prolific in her own right, to be able to bring this to the masses and people who might not otherwise know about her. And I just thought that that was such a cool thing to be able to experience.
this is very much resonant of a conversation topic that we had in our Killers of the Flower Moon episode last week, which is basically that point around what are the stories that we tell and who gets to tell them and control the narrative. And you're right, like both of these directors have chosen to dedicate their time and energy and efforts towards telling the stories of those that might not be in the limelight traditionally and haven't been actually at all in the past uh, decades of history. And the ability for them to drive attention and engagement from the masses to those stories is like a pretty and like wildly powerful um, weight to carry, and an ability to be able to do that for people that are coming to this theater. I mean, I texted you this, but my theater was packed, absolutely packed. Like, I usually try and find a seat that's, away from the big groups and whatnot. I had trouble. I had like sitting like one seat over from one person, one seat over the other. The theater was packed, and you're right. The impact of people getting to see this story being told and seeing the other side um, is powerful. It's huge.
Yeah, and I was just thinking about like the importance of having female writers and female directors too. If and there's always been female directors as long as there's been movies, but we're seeing so many more really really talented female directors who are getting to make these types of movies, and I think that that is so important, because if it was still a primarily male dominated profession, then a movie like this is less likely to come forward. But because we have so many incredible female directors, we're able to see more of these types of stories, which I think are really really important just to be told. It's worth watching and considering, and especially with some of the themes that are covered in this film. I love that this was able to be made and that people are seeing it. Like I went
How was your
to
theater?
yeah, I went to an early morning showing on Saturday morning, and there are usually two theaters that are kind of equidistant from the house. One of them was packed, and so I went to the less packed one, but there was still
Wow.
quite a handful of people willing to see this on a Saturday morning, which is that
Wow.
just blew my mind.
That's incredible. That's amazing. I did not expect that at all with this film. I think that there would be like a decent turnout, but people are showing up for this movie in ways that were far beyond what I imagined. It's
Hmm.
fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah, me too. Especially because I feel like Priscilla Presley isn't that well known, at least
Yeah.
not in my circles. Like,
Yeah.
people don't know who she is. So it's interesting that so many people are drawn to this film.
Hmm. Yeah, I am intrigued by like the marketing. Because I really haven't seen a ton of marketing in kind of pop culture or beyond like the film channels and whatnot that we follow and news. But like marketing wise, it hasn't really invaded into the general psyche either. So my one of the theories that I had while the opening credits were happening as well is I wonder if there's like some star power that Jacob Elordi is bringing to this as well. He's been in a couple of films. I know he's kind of like a buzzy new item on the market, so I feel like there's potentially just some traction that he's able to bring in as well. There's a Sofia Coppola ness of it all as well. I think that combined with the story being about Elvis, like that trifecta of three factors might be doing some great things for this movie.
Yeah, whatever the reasons are, it's great. I love that people are seeing this in theaters.
Yep. Yep. One thing that I really appreciated about this film, and it feels like Sofia Coppola has done such an intentional job to do this, but she's using Priscilla's story to tell actually a larger story around the gender roles and gender dynamics and some of the burdens that women carry and the expectations that women have of there's so much emphasis and so many dedicated shots throughout the film. Opening credits is a perfect example, but throughout the film of the emphasis on looks and appearance and the primping process. And that just felt so intentional that she's weaving in this idea that um, women are often defined in terms of how they are seen and viewed by men. And you see that in so many scenes with Priscilla and Elvis as well. He treats her like an object in many scenes. And then there's that scene with her going shopping and she's paraded out in different outfits to literally an audience of men sitting on the couch, commenting, offering their critiques, sharing their guidance on what she should and shouldn't be wearing, how she should and shouldn't be doing her makeup and her hair. Like the way that she is molding to the expectations of men and of her man in this movie, I think is feels so prominent throughout the film.
Yeah. Yeah, and that is a very real thing too. I think that's what's so jarring about it is that women live through that every day. This isn't something that was just limited to the 60s. You know, it's not of a bygone era, but so many women are actually living under that type of control too. And so I love that this film does such a good job of putting you in Priscilla's shoes and feeling how stuck she is and what Elvis's control of her does to her. And I feel like the film does a really, really good job of us just being with her, being in her shoes and just seeing all of that she has that she goes through.
Yeah, that's so good. Yeah. And I think the fact that she's so young when this whole journey for her begins is also very resonant for that universal um, experience for a lot of women and girls growing up as well. Which is there's this I think there's this messaging now in discourse around like the rejection of having to be a certain way for men. There's a lot of body positivity messaging and whatnot that we are beginning to finally celebrate as women. And you see this a lot in like makeup brands and whatnot that they're celebrating different types of facial features and body types and things like that. But um, when Priscilla meets him and begins this journey, she's so young that there isn't even that awareness to reject that. Uh, she doesn't know any better. She is like also lured into that belief that her value is defined by the affection and the attention from Elvis, and that emphasis on her um, youthfulness throughout the film I thought was so significant and also is so universal to the way that young girls are just fed these messagings and the way that the systems of the world works and don't know yet to stand up against it and reject it. We are only beginning that discourse, and um, I think that that was pretty fascinating as well as how young she is when she's begun to see this aspect of her relationship to men.
Yeah. Yeah, I throughout the whole film, I was just shocked at how many adults seemed to just be okay with what was
Mm,
happening. You know, like at the beginning of the film, she's chilling at a diner on the base and a grown man in the military is like, "Hey, me and my wife really want to take you to go meet Elvis." And is pushing this so hard. And I was like, "Okay, man, what is going on here? What is your motivation as a grown man trying to get this child to go to Elvis's party? What is this? This is inappropriate." And so, like, that just started me the whole movie. I did not trust a single adult because no adults were looking out for this child. And I
mm,
was just, I think that's what
mhm.
really blew me away about this film is that it's not this story about Elvis being this evil person who did all of these evil things. It really to me felt like painting this whole system of people and all of these people who are complicit in allowing this to happen for whatever reason. You know, I feel like some of them probably had good intentions or maybe they just had neutral intentions, but all of those decisions landed this child in this situation where she was able to be preyed upon. And I thought that that was such a fascinating way to frame this story.
That's such a fabulous point. I love that you picked up on that theme and it sounds like it was like really reverberating in your mind. The adults in this movie that I really had a lot of questions about were her parents. Um,
Yes. Yes.
I just I don't I again, this is all through the lens of we are viewing this story through this movie. So there might be other facts and figures and truth about what her parents agreed to or didn't agree to. But in this movie, her parents don't seem to put up too much of a fight against their daughter just going off to be with him. I don't know if
Mm-hmm.
there was other motivations and you know gains that they received from this, but the lack of protection and guidance from her mother and her father, I was floored at. I think that, against this like behemoth of a superstar and his whole team and the pressures that they might have faced, I don't know if there's some factors that played there, but um, the movie didn't depict them putting up too much of a fight. They were like, hey, this is a little weird. Um, One conversation, sit down conversation with Elvis, and like, all right, we're going to send you away now to this man who is 10 years older than you to stay with him, who's a superstar. Like, this is oh, red flags all around. Red flags all around. And like the safety of their child, all of that is just, I was floored, honestly. I couldn't wrap my head around it, to be honest.
Yeah, yeah, me neither. And I kept trying to find a way to make it make sense,
Yeah.
and nothing about it makes sense.
Yeah.
Like, and granted, I'm not a parent, so what do I know? But like, I don't know, maybe better to have your child hate you rather than allowing them to do what they want to do that's very potentially destructive at some of the most formative years of their life, you know? Like,
Oh, man.
she's she's a freshman at the start of this when she
Yes.
starts dating him, and I'm like, "Oh no,
What?
this is way too big for this child to be dealing with." These are
Mhm.
huge things that she's grappling with as a teenager that she is not equipped for, and she doesn't have the support system to process through them. Like, I was so frustrated. I just wanted to take her and take her out of this situation, and then let's just go plop you somewhere safe where you can have a
Yeah.
loving community around you and you can just be a normal person.
Yeah.
But then that wouldn't be an interesting movie. So
No.
here we are.
It doesn't make sense too because her parents are not distant, they're not absent. Um,
Yeah.
they are very involved, and you actually see a whole scene of especially her father being incredibly strict and aware and very involved with wanting to guide their children. So it doesn't compute in my brain, like if they were just away and emotionally distant, super uninvolved,
Mhm.
and let
Yeah.
you she's just on her own and she makes this choice and no one's really like holding her back. Like, I get it a little bit more, but it's insinuated that the father, especially and the mother as well, are incredibly involved in her life. So yeah, that's why my brain goes to, were there incentives for them, because there's those scenes
Mhm.
where Elvis, one of his team members, or one of the older dudes that goes up to her, says like, don't worry, I'll talk to them. And immediately next scene is her on her way, on her merry way to his home. So there seems to be like an efficiency in their convincing as well that I feel like smells a little bit suspicious.
Yeah. Yeah. That was all of my
Weird.
questions were like, what is in it for these adults?
Yeah.
Like, why are you pushing this child onto this celebrity so hard? This
Yeah.
is gross. Like,
Hmm.
what are we doing here, people? Why does no one see this as wrong?
I don't know. I don't get it.
I don't either. It was
Oh,
so gross. I did not like it.
it's so bad. Yeah. I have a confession too, which is that I usually try to take my phone out in a movie theater because we hate to be that person, right? I could not stop myself about 15 minutes into this movie from pulling out my phone and Googling what their age difference was because I knew it was going
Mm,
to bother me the whole
mhm.
movie.
Yeah,
It's
that's
like,
fair.
maybe this is some like really convenient hair and makeup situation and costume design that's like intentionally making her look maybe younger than she actually is and whatnot. Oh no, it was confirmed to me, 10-year age difference. So she was 14 and he was 24 when they first met. And I was like,
Ugh.
okay, this is helpful for me to continue on this movie because I would have been just spiraling down that question hole if I did not satisfy that answer. So that is bonkers. That is bonkers. And it really was illuminated. That kind of fact and figure was just bumping around in my brain for the rest of the movie.
Yeah. It's just it's so gross.
So
Like,
bad. It's
that's
so bad.
horrible. These grown people pushing this child onto this grown man. Ugh. And like, hey man, I am here for like May December romances, but like you have to be fully grown adults who are able to make these decisions when you
Yeah.
come into the relationship. She was a
Mhm.
child.
Yeah.
Ugh. I got so upset at all of the adults in this movie because no one was protecting this child.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
horrible.
Yeah. Oh man. It's real bad. It's real bad. And even by the time she gets to Graceland, she's still only 16. Like
Yeah.
non-consensual
Yeah.
adult yet at all, you know what I mean?
Yeah. She's so young in this. And
So
and I think the film does a really good job illustrating
mhm.
how this relationship with Elvis, while she did want it and she did choose it and she was enjoying aspects of it, it showed how isolated she was. You know, even when she
Mhm.
was walking around in school and everybody is whispering about her and talking about her, and how damaging that must have been to her. Again, like these are really formative years of her life and she's being ogled at and whispered about, and that has to have a negative effect on you.
Yeah, yeah. So good. The movie in many aspects I think like you mentioned really emphasizes the power structure, the age difference pretty significantly. Like it, this is why I chose this for my one sentence summary, but every time she's doing homework, I'm like, this is a representation of the fact that she has not graduated high school yet. Every time they're talking about schoolwork, um, in conversations with Elvis, in conversations with her father, when she's doing schoolwork while Elvis is having a party at his home, like in the bedroom with the tiger statue, like the clash of those things, uh just there's an incongruence there that is uncomfortable, you know, and it is a representation of the fact that she has not become an adult yet. She is not 18, and this relationship is really uncomfortable because of that fact. And I thought that that continuous weaving of this like presence of schoolwork and grades and all of that, I thought was just like such a smart way to showcase and depict her youthfulness.
And we spend so much time in the like 14 to 18 age
Yeah.
range. Like we are there for a
Mhm.
minute.
Mhm.
And I really love that the film chooses to linger there, which is a really really uncomfortable part of the story.
Yeah.
And I think that's why I was thinking so much about like the larger group of people instead of just Elvis, because I had expected when the movie started
Mm.
and we learned that she was 14, I thought that we were just going to kind of like fast forward through her teenage years and then really focus on her like 20s. But
Yeah.
that's the opposite of what happens. And so because I was like, "Oh my gosh, this is so wrong what's being done to her," I was focused on all of the adults and like, why are you allowing this to happen to her? What is going on? And the larger systems at play and those potential incentives that the film never really dives into. But I think it was so smart to just camp out in one of the more uncomfortable portions of this story.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that the transformation that we see that she undergoes as well, that the film is able to take the time to showcase that instead of kind of rushing through it. Uh, I thought that the way that they used hair, makeup, clothing to depict that slow transformation of um, the innocence and the kind of the bright-eyedness that she carries at the beginning of the film like really gets stomped on, and she becomes what they Elvis and team of adults want her to be and become. And um, I think there's a period of time in there where she starts to have the darker hair and the bigger eyeliner and whatnot, where she still looks like that girl that we spent so much time with at the beginning of the film, you know. And I think had we not spent as much time with her in her younger years, um, we wouldn't be able to see that thread line through as clearly, that presence of that, like, this is a young girl that is just forced into this world and pretending and trying to fit into this world of adults. Like, I thought that was really smart for us to do, because we might not have as strong of impression of those younger years of her had we glossed over them quickly and quickly montaged to when she really kind of completes the transformation that she does.
No, that's really good. And I think we also get to see, kind of going back to what we talked about earlier, is like the standard of beauty too, cuz each time Elvis would make a suggestion about how she should change her looks, every time I was like, "No, that's actually worse." Like, she looked better before you started messing with her. So, like, again, I loved that we got to see that transformation as clearly, because then we can, that compare contrast is more apparent, and she's not always, this hair, big eye makeup, but we got to see who she is without all of that. And I don't know, it's sad to watch her kind of go down that rabbit hole and experience that metamorphosis, because we saw how beautiful she is just as she was.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And there's so many scenes along that journey when she's transforming and molding into what he wants her to be, that you see this little girl who's trying to be a woman and feeling the pressures of wanting to be a woman. You know, she's dressing differently. I felt this most during the Vegas scenes where they take that little trip to Vegas, and she's
Mm-hmm.
literally surrounded by like all older men, and she looks like a young child trying to dress and wear the clothing that is sophisticated and whatnot. But we it's almost like we spend enough time with who she really was to begin with, that we also know that this is not her. And so that tension is kind of the point, which is great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I just kept thinking about, like, why are you trying to grow up so quickly? And, like, obviously, like, you get it. Like, when you're a teenager, you want to be older. You don't want to be a teenager anymore. So, like, we've all experienced that. But we were watching her walk through that in a way that I feel like a lot of movies don't show it to you in that way. And so I just kept wondering while watching, like, who would she have become had she not gone through this? Like, who would Priscilla Presley be today if if she hadn't met Elvis, if she hadn't gone with that weird adult who was trying to get her to go to Elvis's party,
Hmm.
like, who would she have become in if she hadn't had to grow up this young and go through all of these things? And I that was just a recurring thought that I had while watching. And so it was this weird, almost like mourning of who this child could have become instead of who she actually became.
Yeah, which then leads you back to, like, she was so young to begin with. Like, who were
Yeah.
the people that should have protected her
Yep.
from that, protected her from this life that she's led and kind of been marked by, and being defined in relationship to him. Yeah, I too felt that sense of, as she was wearing the different clothing and wearing the different makeup and the bigger hair and whatnot, like, mourning the little girl. Like, I felt like her parent, you know, in a way. Like, when you miss that bright-eyed youthfulness that she really had, and that natural beauty that she exhibited, and you see her trying hard to be something that she's not. And it was it was somewhat restorative, I think, to see the way that the makeup then recedes again to being more minimal as she gets older and begins to live her separate life, and finally in that ending scene, like, choosing herself and choosing to walk away um, for herself. And honestly, the makeup is a whole character in this movie. Like the
Hmm.
makeup is gone. She is rocking her natural beauty and her natural hair, and it's gorgeous on her. And you see the effects of the life that she's lived. Like there's a exhaustion and like a tiredness that you see in her in that ending scene. But it's almost like she is back again, and the makeup has receded, and she is transformed back to who she could have been again. And so, yeah, I hope this wins a bunch of makeup and hair and costume design awards
Mm,
because, man,
yeah.
does a lot of heavy lifting.
Oh my gosh, yes. Yeah. The makeup is a character, the hair is a character, and the
The
clothes are
clothes
a
are a
character.
character.
We
Yes.
got a lot of characters in this movie.
Yeah, yeah, very much so. Very much so. And I love what I loved about the clothing too is in those years where she's beginning the transformation, the clothing you can tell really like don't seem to fit her at all. And
Mhm.
and as she gets older and really steps into that role, the clothing feels like a little bit more comfortable and natural for that version of her. But they did a really good job of showcasing that like discomfort, and like she doesn't clearly feel comfortable in those clothing and those in progress years before she really transforms and embraces the persona that she has. So I thought they did a good job of showcasing that like discomfort or lack of feeling coherent with everything else.
Yeah, yeah, and I love how the film so subtly shows how Elvis was guiding her clothing decisions too. I mean, I guess some of it is not so subtle, but like just his little like offhanded remarks that he would make, and you understand how eager she is to please him. And so she's willing to do whatever even if she's not comfortable. And so I loved how clear that contrast was. Uh that it really wasn't her desire initially to be doing these things, but she did it anyway, and everything in the film does a really good job highlighting that internal battle that she seems to be having.
Yeah, honestly, I'm pretty impressed that she still managed to hold on to that sense of self for her in a lot of those scenes. And like especially in that scene where she tries on that dress that
Mhm.
Elvis seems to love, but she's like, I don't really like this one, and she can kind of articulate that pretty clearly. I'm like, honestly, props to you for not getting totally like absorbed into this world. Like there's still that like sense of self, and her opinions and her thoughts are still like prominent and haven't been totally taken over. And I think like for any 14-year-old, I think I would have easily just gotten totally absorbed into this and tried to like mold into whatever I needed to be and whatnot. And I think a lot of 14-year-olds and whatnot in those high school years, like you feel that sense of trying to fit into your environment, whether it's at school or whatnot. And I'm just impressed that she even could retain an ounce of self identity amidst all of it.
Yeah, right? I mean high school is quite a long time ago now for me, but like I do remember how my friends and I would like shapeshift as we were
Yeah.
trying to like figure out who we were, and what groups we would want to be in, and how we would change our
Hmm.
personalities. We would change how we dressed. We would change all of these things
Yeah.
about us, which is such like a high school thing to do, and she's doing it to an extreme,
Yeah.
and she still is able to push back sometimes. I
Right.
You're right, that is really really impressive that she was able to keep so much of herself.
Hmm. And like stand up to
Yeah.
their opinions. I
Yeah.
I think the average 14-year-old would not have as much conviction and sense of self the way that she somehow still retains. And I think that's probably key to her even like surviving this experience at all and not just getting totally sucked in. Like she's willing to call out, like, hey, Elvis, like maybe you should stop the pills. He doesn't listen to her, but like she articulates that very clearly to him. And there's many little moments like that where you see that she has a brain and she has not totally just been absorbed into this world, and that is very impressive. Most 14-year-olds would not.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I loved all of those moments kind of sprinkled throughout the film where she would push back against him. And you could tell that she was also like choosing her moments wisely too. Like she's choosing her
So
battles
smart.
strategically here. Um and and then you see the escalating reaction from him every time she gives even the minor, like most minor pushback, and he
Mhm.
just explodes. And I think that that was also like a really interesting progression that we see, that he gets more aggressive, but that doesn't necessarily dissuade her from speaking her mind when she knows that she must. And I really appreciated that about that character.
Yes. That was something that I found really fascinating, is that he becomes more volatile throughout this film. Ironically, she becomes more even keel, more calm when she deals with him. And I mean, it's a huge testament to her ability to like understand his triggers and what he's maybe like looking for or trying to like start something, and she does not play his game at all. I think in her earlier years, she kind of has the bigger, more explosive reactions, but Homegirl knows how to like deal with him. So like the scene that really stood out to me was when he calls her in. She is pregnant, like almost
Yeah.
about to pop the baby out. And he says he's going to leave her. And she says, "When do you want me to leave?" And then
Yeah.
immediately he goes back on it. Like she understands him in a way that I think no one else probably does. And then also can uh, like deal with him with that knowledge and insight about the way that he is wired, what he's looking for in the situations, and how to not give him or not play his game. And that fortitude that she exhibits is wildly impressive.
Yeah, yeah, and that's such a defense mechanism,
Mhm.
that people in those really, really controlling environments learn how to develop. And like in order I this is obviously like a very extreme example, but like some people, in order for them to stay alive, need to learn
Mhm.
all of those kind of things. And obviously like her situation was not that extreme, but she developed that because she was immersed in that world for so long. And I, like you were saying, the film does a really good job of highlighting that in, without bringing a ton of attention to it either.
Yeah.
But I love how clearly we can see that throughout, that she, man, she learned how to survive, and that was just a tool in her tool belt in order to make
Mhm.
it through this.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. Because I honestly expected this to be an explosive, toxic
Yeah,
relationship,
me too.
and it's got, all of the ingredients for that dish to be served up on a silver platter, and somehow it curbs that entirely, and it's in large part to the fact that she doesn't play his games with him. She has a few um, moments where she reacts in a kind of big way, and she's jealous, as she should be, of him not being faithful, not being loyal, and whatnot. But she doesn't play that. She doesn't feed into that toxic aspect of him. I think that there, like you mentioned, it is a defense mechanism, not necessarily that it's a healthy, mature relationship, but it doesn't have the character traits of kind of two toxic people like fueling each other in like wildly explosive ways, and both of them being volatile. I think that the film seems to emphasize the even keeled nature that she deals with his descent into that volatile emotional state.
Yeah, yeah. I was ready for some melodrama.
Yeah,
Like
me
I
too.
thought this was going to be like Jerry Springer show in a
Yes.
movie. I was
Hmm.
ready. And it's not. And I
Yeah.
just, even when she tells him that they're getting a divorce, I thought that was gonna be
Yeah,
this, like, explosive, like, almost terrifying moment for her, like, I was ready to be scared for her,
me too.
and, nope, wasn't wasn't that dramatic,
Mhm.
and again, like, I think that's so smart of this film to be so restrained because it's not interested in the drama, but it's interested, I think, in some of these larger themes that we've talked about. And the drama would have taken away from some of these themes because this is really about her reclaiming herself and reclaiming her story. And if we were caught up in all of the melodrama, then it probably would have ended up being a movie about Elvis instead of a movie about Priscilla. And so it's just so smart the way that this movie frames all of it and is so restrained in its portrayal of a really toxic relationship, but it's not even about the relationship, it's about Priscilla.
I think that's a fabulous point that you make around this film choosing to create space for our thoughts and our feelings to wander elsewhere and not be on the emotional roller coaster of a melodrama the way that honestly a lot of the biopics like lean full on into. um, it creates more space for us to think about these larger themes around femininity, around womanhood, around systems and manipulation and all of that that if there were kind of big explosive things happening on screen we honestly wouldn't have the mental capacity to take it all in and also ruminate on those things. So I think that's a really, really great point that it's intentionally designed to curate our minds and our thoughts to wander in the directions that this film wants us to. Um, it's so good. It's so good.
Who knew that we would get all of that from a Priscilla Presley biopic?
Yeah, really though.
Yeah.
And like the movie sets it up to be highly dramatic. There's
Yes.
emotional abuse, there's physical abuse, there's drugs, there's jealousy, there's stardom, that like everything you want for a giant stew of melodrama is there.
Mhm. Yep.
And they don't capitalize on it. It's
Yeah.
really impressive, honestly.
Yeah. It's great. Love
Yeah.
it.
Hmm. Hmm. Okay. What are the other major themes that maybe were ruminating in your mind throughout this film? Any other big ones that we want to hit on?
So something else that impressed me about this film is what we get to know about Priscilla's character. You know, I feel like for a good chunk of the movie, like we don't really know who she is because we first meet her when she's 14. She's a teenager, so all of that stuff is still forming, and then she becomes who Elvis wants her to be. And so even though she still does have some agency and will push back against him like we talked about, like we don't know who she is really as a person because she has been wrapped up in him for so long. And I love that the film kind of keeps her a mystery for so much of it as she is isolated and as she is stuck in that house, because then when she leaves and when she gets out, then you feel this freedom, like she's not just leaving him, she's not just getting a divorce, but she is reclaiming herself, not and not just like how she looks, but she is able to fully express her personality, which she hasn't been able to do for however long, 10 years. And so I love the way that this film portrayed her and kind of kept her almost this like aloof mystery to us, so that when she does leave, it's this like, oh wow, like what will you become now that you can be fully yourself, now that you're reclaiming you, what will you go on to do? And then the film just kind of leaves that kind of open ended for us.
Like she has truly returned to who she is and is able to now build her life again. Like it is a rebirth in a lot of ways for her. I thought, yeah, that's a fabulous point. The other aspect of that I think is really interesting is that I wonder if it helps us as well as the viewers uh, consider her as like a universal like woman who is going through this experience. There's so many shots of her silhouette from a profile throughout this movie. Like I was trying to like start to count them because there's so many scenes that just end with like a profile view of her silhouette with like a very brightly lit background, and you see kind of her doll like features from the profile. But I was like, man, she is every woman who is going through this journey of growing up and figuring out like who you are as a woman. And I wonder if those the lack of detail about her, and then also kind of like from a cinematography perspective, really help us zoom out to those universal themes that are applicable beyond just this one person, this one female, this one woman, um, going too deep on that being like an incredibly personal story for her. It is very personal, but you're right. There is a sheen of mystery that we also feel about her personality.
No, that's a really good point. And this film I feel like does both well. You know, it tells a good story about Priscilla and her journey, but because she is distant enough, we're also very easily able to extrapolate these things to the larger themes. And sometimes movies really struggle with doing both of those things well. And I feel like this film really nails both of them.
Yes, we've seen many examples where like in the attempt to create like a blank protagonist for us to empathize with and see ourselves in, it ends up just being like a very boring character that we feel like we don't know very well. And um, John David Washington's played a couple of those examples in the past that we've talked about. But you're right, it's a hard task to do that. It's actually I think a little bit more easy to get that emotional connection to a very fully developed, dynamic, three-dimensional character that we feel like we know, but we might not see ourselves in. I think it's a little bit more straightforward to do that approach. This is hard. This is really hard. That's a good point.
Yeah, it gives you just enough so that you're like rooting for her and like interested in her, but leaves that space for us to fill in some things too.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yep,
that's a wild
that's
needle
hard.
to try and thread. Holy moly.
Very difficult. Hmm. Any other major thoughts that you had with this film before we wrap up?
Um, no, I think I just have silly things left.
Okay. I have one more thing that I just kept
Yes.
thinking about through this movie, which is that the casting director for this movie needs an award because
Yes.
the sheer size of Jacob Elordi compared to the sheer size of Priscilla's character, I forget the actress's name. I'm so sorry. Um, further highlights all of the themes from a kind of figurative perspective that this movie is trying to communicate. Um, he's huge. He's larger than life, but he's like a foreboding presence, and he exhibits and makes his presence and his power known. And she is small, so like visually in every scene, from a like cinematography perspective, this film is highlighting that size difference between them, and it feeds into those themes of one, the age difference, but two, the power dynamics that are at play here. um, so I think that honestly plays a highly effective role in the like the like movies themes that it's able to be supported by visually. So I thought that was really really great, really awesome. And the actress's name is Kaylee Spaney. So
And she's tiny. She is 5 foot
so
one.
I know.
She's itty bitty.
It's
And
so
Jacob
perfect.
is 6'5".
Hmm.
He's giant. Like,
Yep.
so I love that you were able to take like their height difference and make it into a beautiful metaphor. That's lovely. The whole time I was like, oh my God, how is he going to fit into any car that they show? Like, no wonder he has to travel by a bus. He can't
Mm-hmm.
fit into an airplane. Like, he's huge.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep.
But your point was much better.
Well, and all of the clothing, the costume choices that they give him are also
Yeah.
just emphasizing his sheer height. You know, he's got like some high-waisted pants that make his legs look like they go on for literally forever. So all of that is working very well together. But yes, the man needs to fit into some car somehow. But he's Elvis, so
So it's
custom
fine.
build him for him, you know?
That's true. Also, in case you were wondering, real Elvis was 6 feet.
Wow.
Because
Okay, so
that,
they gave
so
him
you
extra
had to
fun.
Google the age difference. I had to Google people's heights because I
That's
needed
amazing.
to know, was Elvis also a giant? He was not.
Mm-hmm.
He was 6 foot.
No,
Very
he wasn't.
reasonable height.
They gave him a whole extra 5 inches. Jacob
I
Elordi fit the bill.
that's quite generous.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Okay, what are your bucket of silly things? Let's
Okay,
hear
so
them.
I have two silly things. One is somebody obsessed with feet because there are a lot of shots of feet in this movie. And I couldn't make sense of it. I was like, is this supposed to be some metaphor that I'm just not picking up on? Do feet represent something? But there is a lot of shots of feet.
There are. You're right. So many of the scenes of them in the bedroom just yeah,
Just a
it's a
whole
lot. It's
foot
weird.
just
I
taking
don't
up half the screen.
I don't understand. It's really weird.
Especially like some people are really weird about feet too. So I was like, this feels like a weird detail to include as prominently as it is in this film. Because you're going to alienate some audience members just because there's so much feet.
Yeah, but you'll make some audience members really happy apparently that have weird
That's true.
relationships to feet.
That's true. Okay,
Okay.
and then my other silly thing is, did you notice any pink earrings?
I didn't. Oh my gosh. I was wondering if this is going to be one of your silly things. Where are they?
Elvis wears a pink earring sometimes,
Oh,
which is
so,
interesting because that was also the case in the Elvis movie too. He selectively
mm,
wore pink earrings. So maybe this was like an
mm,
actual something that real life Elvis did, was only wear pink earrings sometimes.
yeah. It's a good data point. It's a very good one.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
He's an absolute asshole in this movie, so
Yeah,
it tracks.
he's the worst.
Yeah. Yeah. uh okay. Any other last thoughts about
Nope,
Priscilla?
I don't think so. It was a
We
great movie. It was good.
Mhm,
Loved
mhm.
it.
I'm sure it will be boomeranging back to us very soon in conversation as the awards circuit picks up.
Yep.
I imagine we'll be talking about this one in some capacity.
Yeah.
All right. Well, this was our review and discussion of Priscilla. You can find it available out in theaters. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Movies and Us. Our name sums it up. We're all about movies and the powerful ways we can connect with each other and the world around us. This podcast is about all of us and our shared stories. Everyone is welcome here, and we're so glad you hung out with us today. You can subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or wherever you tune into your favorite shows. Drop us a rating and review, letting us know your thoughts about Priscilla. You can connect with us on Instagram and Twitter at MoviesAndUsPod, or you can always email us at moviesanduspod@gmail.com. We'll be back next week to discuss the film Fingernails. We hope you have an amazing week, and we'll see you next week.